The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the quiet streets of the small town. People were finishing their daily routines, some heading home from work, others stopping at local shops for a few last errands. The air was calm, carrying the faint scent of fresh bread from the bakery nearby and the sound of children playing somewhere down a side street. It seemed like a regular day, one that would pass without much attention. But sometimes ordinary days hold moments that change lives in an instant. A man walked steadily along the sidewalk, his cane tapping rhythmically against the pavement. He was a veteran, someone who had served his country with honor and carried himself with quiet dignity. His movements were confident and measured, though his eyes could not see the world around him. He had learned to navigate life with his other senses, listening closely to the sounds, feeling the vibrations beneath his feet, and sensing the energy of people nearby. There was a calm strength in him, a kind of inner courage that came not from muscle, but from experience and character. He stopped for a moment in front of the small grocery store, letting his hand glide over the textured handle of the door before entering. Inside, the familiar smells of fresh vegetables, fruits, and bread filled the air. He moved with a practiced ease, reaching for a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a few other essentials. The cashier greeted him warmly, and he responded with a simple nod and a small smile. In these ordinary interactions, there was a rhythm, a routine that grounded him and gave life its small comforts. Meanwhile, a group of bikers roared down the main street, their engines loud and aggressive. The leader of the group, a man with a scowl permanently etched on his face, noticed the veteran walking alone. He saw the cane, the careful steps, and immediately labeled the man as weak. The biker's mind was clouded with arrogance and a sense of reckless power. He revved his engine, making the bike jump slightly with each press, drawing attention from a few curious pedestrians. There was a thrill in targeting someone who seemed vulnerable, and the biker's companions laughed and cheered him on, the sound echoing down the empty street. The veteran exited the grocery store, the bags of essentials resting in a reusable tote. He tapped his cane to guide him, moving carefully but without fear. His pace was steady, his steps deliberate, and there was an air of calm determination around him. He was unaware of the group of bikers now approaching from the distance, their engines growing louder, announcing their presence in an unmistakable way. Pedestrians shifted uneasily, sensing trouble before they even saw it. The veteran, focused on his path home, did not notice the danger yet. As the bikers closed in, the leader slowed down slightly, circling around the veteran as if assessing his reaction. The veteran stopped momentarily to feel the air with his hands, to make sure he was still in the clear. The rhythm of his cane tapping was steady, almost meditative, but the sounds of the approaching bikes made his head turn slightly, sensing a disturbance. A sense of unease crept into the scene, though it was subtle, a tension that had not yet erupted. The leader of the bikers decided to make his move. He rolled his bike to the side, stopping just a few feet from the veteran. With a loud, mocking laugh, he shouted something meant to intimidate. The veteran, calm as ever, spoke firmly, asking the man to step aside and leave him in peace. His voice was strong, even without sight, carrying authority and calmness that could not be ignored. The biker, fueled by peer approval and his own misplaced confidence, took a step closer. His companions laughed, encouraging him, creating a bubble of noise around the scene. Passers-by began to notice, some taking a cautious step back, others reaching for their phones to record, unsure of what would happen next. The tension thickened, a quiet storm building before the inevitable clash. The veteran remained composed, grounding himself in the familiar sound of his cane against the pavement and the rhythm of his own breathing. There was no fear, only readiness and patience. The biker decided to escalate. He shoved the veteran's tote slightly, just enough to show aggression, and mocked him openly. The veteran's calm demeanor did not falter. He spoke clearly, explaining that violence was not the answer and that there was no need for conflict. But the biker, drunk on arrogance, did not listen. He laughed louder, taunting the man, and threw a small object toward him, aiming to scare. The veteran, without flinching, caught the object instinctively, feeling its shape and weight. He held it for a moment, then set it aside, never breaking his composure. The pedestrians around the scene held their breath. The quiet town street had become a stage for a confrontation that no one expected. The veteran's calmness contrasted sharply with the biker's reckless energy. There was a strange beauty in this moment, the strength of patience versus the chaos of arrogance. Even those who were not part of the conflict could feel the weight of what was about to happen. As if time itself had slowed for a heartbeat, the biker, frustrated by the veteran's lack of fear and the reactions of the onlookers, grew bolder. He reached out again, trying to shove the veteran more forcefully this time. The veteran shifted slightly, using his cane to maintain balance and readiness. He did not retaliate with anger. Instead, he used his voice to assert control over the situation, reminding the man that respect and decency were far stronger than any act of aggression. The words, simple yet powerful, cut through the noise and drew attention from everyone nearby. Even as the biker prepared for what he believed would be an easy victory, there was a pause, a moment when he realized the veteran was not an ordinary target. The confidence in the veteran's voice, the steadiness of his posture, and the calm that radiated from him created an unexpected tension. The biker hesitated just for a second, but it was long enough for the atmosphere to shift. Passers-by began murmuring, sensing that this would not end as the biker imagined. The veteran's quiet strength was a silent challenge that could not be ignored. The scene continued to hold its delicate balance, the calm veteran on one side and the brash biker on the other. Both were measured in their actions, though for different reasons. The veteran acted from experience and patience, the biker from impulsive arrogance. This contrast set the stage for something larger than either of them, an encounter that would test courage, morality, and the unexpected ways justice can arrive. The street, once ordinary and peaceful, was now filled with tension, waiting for the moment when the calm and the chaos would finally meet. The biker's confidence was like a storm building over a quiet landscape. He took a step closer to the veteran, revving his engine to draw attention, making it clear he was not going to back down. His companions laughed and shouted, creating a chaotic background noise that made the air tense. The veteran, however, remained still, his cane tapping the pavement in steady rhythm, his breathing even and controlled. He did not flinch or show fear. He had faced dangers before, though they had come in different forms. The courage he carried was quiet, yet strong enough to resist the biker's aggression. The biker lunged forward suddenly, shoving the veteran with his shoulder. The veteran stumbled slightly, catching himself with the cane, his senses alert to every movement. He spoke calmly, asking the man to stop, trying one last time to de-escalate the situation. His voice had a weight to it, a calm authority that came from years of experience and self-discipline. But the biker was too wrapped up in his own bravado to listen. He laughed, pushing the veteran's tote bag again, causing the groceries to shift inside. People watching froze, unsure of how far this attack would go. Then the biker did something reckless. He grabbed at the veteran's arm, intending to push him to the ground. The veteran, though blind, felt the movement and used his cane to maintain balance, stepping aside slightly. His movements were precise, not reactive with anger, but guided by instinct and skill. He spoke firmly, warning the man that his actions were wrong and that he would not retaliate violently, but that he would not allow harm either. The words were calm, but carried an unmistakable firmness. The biker, frustrated and seeing that the man did not crumble, grew louder and more aggressive, swinging his fist at the air near the veteran's head in a show of force. Passers-by began to murmur, some moving closer to see, others stepping back for safety. A woman crossing the street whispered to her friend, warning him that the biker seemed dangerous. The veteran's calmness was striking, almost magnetic, drawing attention and a sense of respect from those who watched. He did not react with panic. He did not scream or shout. He simply maintained his composure, using his voice and presence to assert that he was not an easy target. The biker, sensing that his attempts to intimidate were failing, grew impatient. He shoved the veteran again, harder this time. The veteran staggered slightly but held his ground, planting his cane firmly on the pavement and using it to stabilize himself. He spoke clearly, reminding the man that attacking someone who had done nothing to him was cowardly and unjust. The words cut through the noise of the roaring engine and laughter, landing with a sense of moral authority that contrasted sharply with the biker's arrogance. Then the biker made the critical mistake. Thinking he could provoke a reaction, he pushed the tote bag so that some groceries spilled onto the street. The veteran's hand instinctively moved to secure the remaining items, but he did not lose his composure. He calmly set down what was left, bending slightly to pick up a few cans, all the while keeping his voice firm and measured. warning the biker that his actions were unacceptable. The onlookers could see the veteran's dignity in action, his calm bravery shining even in the midst of chaos. The biker's companions cheered him on, but some of them began to hesitate as they observed the veteran's steady composure. There was a growing realization among a few that this was not going to end as easily as they had imagined. The leader of the bikers, however, refused to back down. He stepped even closer, attempting to physically intimidate the man, but his movements were sloppy, overconfident. His arrogance blinded him to the veteran's skill at maintaining balance and presence of mind. At that moment, one passerby cautiously stepped forward, a young man who had seen too many confrontations end in disaster. He tried to intervene verbally, shouting at the biker to stop, but the noise of the engines drowned his words. The veteran, sensing someone nearby, nodded slightly, acknowledging the support without pausing his focus on the attacker. The calm authority of the veteran contrasted sharply with the chaotic aggression of the biker, making the scene feel almost like a test of character itself. The biker, growing increasingly frustrated by the lack of response he expected from the veteran, swung again, this time aiming a punch in the direction of the veteran's chest. The veteran moved instinctively, avoiding the blow with a careful step to the side, his cane providing support. He spoke again, each word deliberate and clear, appealing not to fear but to reason and morality. The calmness of his voice seemed to create a momentary pause in the chaos, a strange stillness amid the sound of engines and shouting. Some onlookers began recording with their phones, capturing the confrontation in disbelief. The tension was palpable, a mix of fear, curiosity, and awe. The veteran's calm strength was remarkable, almost magnetic. Even the biker's companions began to hesitate, seeing that their friend's aggression was meeting a force that was not physical, but moral, composed, and unshakable. The biker, refusing to recognize the weight of the moment, tried to grab the veteran's shoulder to push him down. The veteran stepped back slightly, using his cane to maintain balance and guide himself. He spoke with quiet authority, warning the biker that if he continued, the consequences would be his responsibility. There was no anger in his words, only firm clarity. The scene seemed to slow, the contrast between the calm, disciplined veteran and the reckless, impulsive biker becoming almost cinematic in its intensity. The surrounding crowd began to murmur again, now more impressed than scared. People were realizing that the veteran's courage and composure were extraordinary. Some whispered to each other, expressing admiration for how he handled the aggression without fear. Others began looking for help, unsure of what to do but wanting to ensure that the situation did not escalate further. The biker, frustrated and humiliated by the lack of control, made one final push. He shoved the veteran with more force, expecting resistance or fear. The veteran, however, did not falter. He planted his feet firmly, held his cane steadily, and continued speaking calmly, warning the biker that such behavior was unacceptable and dishonorable. The words, simple and direct, carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. The veteran's courage was a silent shield, protecting him even as the biker continued to strike out. Then, unexpectedly, the veteran reached out to secure the grocery items that had fallen, moving with fluidity and awareness. Despite his blindness, he demonstrated skill and precision, picking up the items without missing a beat or losing focus on the biker. This small act of grace in the midst of confrontation drew gasps from the onlookers, who began to see that this man was no ordinary victim. He was steady, capable, and commanding respect even without sight. The biker, now clearly losing patience and unable to intimidate the man, backed up slightly, panting with exertion. His companions looked uncertain, some realizing that the situation had escalated beyond their control. The veteran remained composed, holding his cane, his groceries, and his dignity. His calm voice continued to assert the moral truth. Aggression toward the innocent is cowardice, and strength is measured by restraint and courage, not by reckless attacks. As the tension reached its peak, the street seemed to hold its breath. The veteran, aware of the threat but not consumed by fear, continued to maintain his balance and composure. The biker, realizing that he had underestimated the man he attacked, began to feel a shift inside himself, a mix of fear, regret, and frustration. He had expected an easy target, but instead he faced someone whose strength was quiet, steady, and undeniable. This was not just a confrontation of bodies, but a clash of character, and the outcome was no longer certain. The crowd remained on the edges, watching with bated breath. The biker's aggression had been met with patience, skill, and moral authority. The veteran, though blind, had turned the situation from one of fear to one of control. The contrast between cowardice and courage, between reckless aggression and steady composure, was now fully visible. The street, once ordinary, had become a stage for a story that would be remembered, not for violence, but for the power of calm strength in the face of threat. The tension on the street reached a point where every sound seemed louder than it really was. Engines rumbled, shouts echoed, and the steady tap of the veteran's cane became a rhythm of calm in the storm of chaos. The biker, frustrated and humiliated, raised his voice, threatening the veteran openly, but the veteran, grounded in experience and courage, did not retreat. His voice, calm but firm, warned the man that continuing would only bring consequences he would regret. From a distance, a figure noticed the commotion. He had been visiting the town, walking through the streets to take in the local sights, when the sound of shouting and revving engines drew his attention. He moved closer, quickly assessing the situation. His presence was commanding even at a distance, and there was an air of confidence and strength about him. People in the crowd sensed something different about this newcomer, though they did not yet know who he was. As he approached, the biker continued to act aggressively, lunging forward to push the veteran again. The veteran dodged smoothly, maintaining balance and composure, his cane tapping against the pavement as he shifted to avoid the blows. Each movement was precise, careful, and deliberate. He spoke again, appealing to reason and decency, asking the man to stop. The biker's friends cheered him on, though there was a growing hesitation in some faces, a sense that their leader's aggression might be his undoing. The newcomer, now closer, saw the full scene, a blind veteran standing his ground against a reckless biker in front of a growing crowd. Without hesitation, he stepped into the path between the two men. His stance was firm and unwavering, radiating authority and control. The biker, seeing a new presence, did not recognize the man immediately. He expected compliance or fear, not the arrival of someone who would challenge him directly. The newcomer spoke, his voice loud enough to cut through the noise of engines and shouting. It was a calm but commanding voice, demanding attention and respect. The biker paused, uncertainty flickering across his face. The veteran, sensing help without needing to see, subtly nodded. He knew that the situation might finally be turning in his favor. The air was thick with anticipation, the crowd silent now, waiting to see what would happen next. The biker, still fueled by arrogance, attempted one more shove toward the veteran. But the newcomer was ready. With precise movements, he intercepted the biker, restraining him before any harm could reach the veteran. The sudden action shocked everyone, including the biker. He had expected resistance from the veteran, not immediate intervention from someone else. His overconfidence had not accounted for a force greater and wiser than his own aggression. The crowd gasped, stepping back to give space. The veteran stood calm and steady, holding his cane and groceries, watching the scene unfold. The newcomer controlled the biker effortlessly, preventing any further attack. The contrast was striking. The biker's reckless arrogance met with precise, controlled strength. The tension of the street transformed instantly, moving from chaos to a moment of awe and realization. The biker struggled, trying to break free, but the newcomer's grip was unyielding. There was no malice in the intervention, only authority and determination to stop harm. The biker's companions began to panic, realizing that their leader's aggression was now entirely ineffective. The presence of the newcomer shifted the power dynamics completely. The crowd watched, some taking tentative steps closer, others holding their phones to capture what was happening, knowing this was a moment they would remember. The newcomer spoke again, clearly and firmly addressing the biker. He warned the man that cowardice and aggression toward those who could not defend themselves were unacceptable. There was no need for violence, yet there would be accountability for reckless actions. The biker's face turned from arrogance to fear, realizing that he was no longer in control. His own behavior had brought him to this point, and the weight of consequence was now visible. The veteran, though blind, sensed the change in the air. He felt a subtle shift, a release of tension, and a growing safety around him. The presence of someone willing to intervene decisively had turned the tide. He remained calm, letting the newcomer handle the confrontation while keeping his own composure. His strength had been steady throughout, but now it was paired with the reassurance of immediate protection. The biker's resistance weakened as the newcomer maintained control. His attempts to escape were clumsy, his arrogance replaced by sudden fear. The crowd murmured in disbelief, some whispering to each other about the unexpected turn of events. The veteran's calm bravery combined with the newcomer's decisive action created a moment that seemed larger than life, a display of courage, restraint, and justice. As the crowd watched, the newcomer guided the biker to a safer position, ensuring that he could not continue the attack. The biker, now fully realizing his mistake, began to show signs of regret and fear. The veteran remained composed, observing silently, his presence a steady reminder that strength is not always measured by force but by courage and moral clarity. Witnesses began to feel a sense of relief and admiration. They had watched an aggressive confrontation unfold, and now they were seeing justice executed in real time. The combination of calm bravery and decisive intervention had diffused the situation, turning what could have been a moment of tragedy into a story of protection and moral strength. People whispered about the newcomer's skill, his authority, and the veteran's unwavering courage. The biker, finally subdued, realized that his actions had consequences beyond his understanding. His fear was now tangible, his arrogance replaced by a dawning awareness of what he had done. The crowd watched as the newcomer maintained control, ensuring the situation did not escalate further. The veteran stood quietly, holding his items and cane, an example of calm strength amidst chaos. In the aftermath, the tension on the street slowly began to ease. The biker's companions helped him understand the gravity of the moment, their encouragement replaced with hesitant acknowledgement of the mistake. The crowd dispersed slightly, some lingering to talk quietly about what had happened, the story spreading quickly through whispered conversations. The veteran and the newcomer became silent symbols of courage and protection, their presence a reminder that cowardice is always met with consequences when justice is near. The street, once ordinary, now carried the memory of the confrontation. The veteran's calm and controlled demeanor, combined with the newcomer's decisive intervention, had turned a dangerous situation into a lesson about morality, courage, and restraint. Those who had witnessed it would carry the memory, telling others about the day when reckless aggression was stopped by strength guided by justice. The biker, now humbled and subdued, would remember the lesson as well, a mark on his consciousness that cowardice meets justice in unexpected ways. The veteran, finally able to resume his walk, continued down the street calm and composed, his cane tapping gently against the pavement. He had faced danger without fear, and had been protected by someone willing to act decisively. The crowd watched him pass, admiration and respect evident on their faces. The street returned to its quiet state, but the lesson lingered in the air, a reminder that courage, composure, and justice could prevail even in the most unexpected moments. The street slowly began to regain its usual calm, but the echoes of the earlier confrontation still lingered. The roar of engines had faded, replaced by the quiet murmur of onlookers discussing what had just happened. People lingered on the sidewalks, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others offering quiet nods of approval and admiration for the veteran who had faced the aggression without fear. The sense of tension had lifted, but the lesson was clear. Bravery and calm composure had met reckless arrogance and had prevailed. The biker, now sitting on the curb with his companions around him, looked pale and shaken. The physical restraint of the newcomer had left him breathless, and the sudden realization of what he had done began to sink in. His earlier confidence had dissolved completely, replaced by a mix of fear, regret, and humiliation. He stared at the pavement, unsure whether to apologize or simply remain silent. His companions, too, seemed at a loss. Some whispered nervously to one another, clearly embarrassed, realizing that their support of the attack had not made them look brave at all. Instead, they had been witnesses to a clear lesson in courage and restraint. The veteran stood a few steps away, holding his cane and groceries with quiet dignity. He was calm, his breathing steady as he observed the scene. Though he could not see, he sensed the change in the energy around him. The biker's aggression had been stopped decisively, and the street now held an almost tangible sense of justice. The veteran's calm presence contrasted sharply with the fear and regret now written on the faces of the bikers. He had faced cowardice with patience, and in doing so, had shown the crowd what true courage looked like. The newcomer, who had intervened decisively, continued to keep a firm but non-threatening hold on the biker. His movements were controlled, precise, and authoritative, ensuring that no further harm could come to anyone. He spoke calmly but firmly, explaining that violence and aggression toward innocent people were unacceptable. There was no anger in his voice, only clarity and authority. The biker listened, his head lowered, feeling the weight of responsibility for his actions. The words were not meant to punish physically, but to awaken awareness and accountability. It was a lesson he would not forget. The crowd began to murmur again, not in fear this time, but in admiration. People exchanged looks and whispered about the courage they had witnessed, both from the veteran who had stood calmly and from the newcomer who had acted decisively to stop the aggression. The quiet streets, once filled with tension and chaos, now felt infused with a sense of moral clarity. Those who had witnessed the confrontation understood in some small way the power of restraint, courage, and the right use of strength. The biker finally spoke, his voice trembling. He muttered something that sounded like an apology, though it was hesitant and unsure. The newcomer did not react with hostility. Instead, he nodded slightly, acknowledging the attempt at responsibility. The veteran, sensing the sincerity of the gesture, allowed himself a small nod of understanding. This was not about revenge or punishment. It was about recognizing wrongs and facing the consequences. The lesson was moral, not merely physical. The veteran's calm and composed response had set the tone for how accountability should be handled. Some bystanders, emboldened by what they had witnessed, stepped forward cautiously. One woman spoke to the biker, explaining that his actions had been reckless and hurtful, not brave. Another man offered words of support to the veteran, expressing admiration for his composure and courage. The street was filled with a mix of whispered conversations, nods of understanding, and the occasional soft laugh, a release of tension that had built up over the past moments. The presence of the newcomer had made it clear that acts of aggression have consequences, but also that courage and calmness command respect. The veteran began to resume his walk home, carefully tapping his cane on the pavement, his groceries secure. He did not rush. His pace was measured, showing that calm courage allows one to maintain control even after chaos. The biker remained seated, his companions helping him to stand finally. There was no celebration or boastful talk. Instead, a quiet recognition that actions have weight, and that cowardice is always revealed when true courage appears. Nearby, a few young onlookers began to discuss what had just happened. One boy, wide-eyed, asked his friend if the veteran had been scared. The friend shook his head, explaining that the veteran had been calm and steady the whole time. They both looked back at the biker, realizing how fear and regret had replaced arrogance almost instantly. It was a lesson not just in bravery, but in morality, responsibility, and respect for others. Even the smallest witnesses could see the clear contrast between recklessness and integrity. The newcomer finally released his hold on the biker, stepping back but keeping a watchful eye to ensure that there would be no further trouble. The biker now slouched, his pride broken, and muttered apologies that were more for himself than anyone else. He understood that he had acted foolishly, and that he would face the consequences of his actions, both socially and perhaps legally. The veteran continued forward, undisturbed, walking with the calm rhythm of someone who had survived much and who understood the weight of life beyond immediate conflict. The street slowly returned to normal activity. Cars passed by, shop doors opened and closed, and the murmurs of conversation filled the air. The event, though intense, became a moment of reflection for those who had seen it. People talked about courage, about restraint, about facing aggression without yielding to fear. The veteran's composure and the newcomer's decisive intervention left an impression that would last much longer than the noise of engines and shouts. The biker, still shaken, now faced the reality of his choices. He could no longer rely on bravado or peer support to carry him through. He had seen firsthand that true strength lies in respect, moral clarity, and the ability to act decisively when needed. He had been humbled not violently, but by a clear demonstration of right and wrong, and by the calm courage of someone he had thought weak. This was a turning point, one that would influence how he thought about strength, aggression, and consequences in the future. The veteran reached his home, greeted by the familiar sights and sounds that brought comfort and stability. He placed his groceries on the counter and set aside his cane. Though he could not see, he felt a profound sense of relief and quiet satisfaction. He had faced aggression without fear and had been protected when needed. The events of the day reinforced what he had always known. Courage is not loud or violent. It is steady, patient, and guided by integrity. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the town, the lesson of the street became clear to those who had watched. Cowardice, aggression, and arrogance are revealed quickly when met with calm courage and decisive action. The crowd dispersed, carrying the story with them, sharing it with friends, neighbors, and anyone willing to listen. The veteran's quiet bravery and the newcomer's intervention became a moral example, a demonstration of how right actions can restore balance in moments of chaos. The biker's companions helped him to his feet, still shaken, and he muttered apologies once more. The lesson was now real and personal. Actions have consequences, and cowardice is never hidden for long when true courage arrives. The street, once the scene of potential harm, had become a place of reflection and understanding. The veteran's calm presence and the newcomer's timely intervention had transformed what could have been a simple act of aggression into a story that would linger in the town for a long time. By the end of the day, the street returned to its quiet rhythm, but the memory of courage, restraint, and justice remained vivid. The veteran's dignity and composure were admired by all, and the biker's remorse and fear served as a clear lesson that cowardice and aggression always meet justice. The story would be told over and over, not for the drama of the attack but for the strength, morality, and humanity that shone through in the moments that followed. The town slowly settled back into its normal rhythm, but the story of the confrontation lingered in everyone's minds. The streets felt quieter, as though the echo of the chaos had left a lasting impression. People whispered to one another about the events of the day, discussing the courage they had witnessed and the lesson learned from reckless behavior. The veteran walked through his neighborhood with calm confidence, his cane tapping steadily on the pavement, a quiet rhythm that had become a symbol of resilience. The biker, now removed from the immediate confrontation, sat with his companions in silence. The energy of arrogance had vanished, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness of the consequences of his actions. He replayed the events in his mind, each shove, each taunt, now seeming foolish and empty. The reality that his behavior had been witnessed by so many, and that it had been stopped decisively, weighed heavily on him. It was not physical pain that affected him, but the recognition of his moral failure. The veteran, returning home, reflected on the encounter as he placed his groceries down and leaned lightly on his cane. Though he could not see, he felt the lessons in the energy around him and the reactions of others. He had maintained his composure throughout, not out of pride but out of understanding. Strength is measured not by how forcefully one can fight, but by how firmly one can stand in the face of aggression without losing dignity or control. The lesson was clear. Calm courage has a power that recklessness cannot overcome. The newcomer, who had intervened decisively, remained nearby until the crowd dispersed and the situation was fully under control. His presence had been a turning point, preventing harm and ensuring the biker could face accountability. He had acted not out of anger or desire for recognition, but because action was necessary to protect the vulnerable and uphold fairness. This decisive courage, paired with the veteran's steady bravery, left a profound impact on everyone who had witnessed it. The crowd slowly dissipated, but conversations continued in small groups. People discussed what courage looked like, how strength could be used responsibly, and why aggression often hides cowardice. Parents explained the events to their children, emphasizing that real bravery is calm, controlled, and guided by principles rather than impulse. The incident became a moral example, a story the community would share long after the initial tension had faded. The biker finally spoke more fully to his companions, acknowledging his errors. His voice, once filled with bravado and defiance, now carried the weight of regret and understanding. He admitted that he had underestimated the veteran and the newcomer, that his reckless aggression had been cowardly, and that he needed to face the consequences of his actions. His companions, too, began to understand the gravity of what had happened, the lesson settling deeply into their minds. This was not punishment by force, but a recognition of moral reality, a humbling that reshaped their understanding of respect and responsibility. The veteran returned to his routine with a renewed sense of peace. Though the encounter had been stressful, He had faced it without fear and remained grounded. His actions served as an example to his neighbors and those who had watched, that courage is calm, patience is powerful, and dignity is unshakable when faced with cowardice. The quiet strength of the veteran, paired with the timely intervention of the newcomer, had turned a potentially violent confrontation into a story of moral clarity. Local shopkeepers and passers-by, who had witnessed the event, reflected on their own reactions. Some had been afraid, some had been unsure how to respond, but all had seen the unmistakable lesson that courage and justice prevail. Conversations at cafes and homes repeated the story, focusing not on the aggression itself, but on the strength of those who stood with principle. The veteran's calmness and the newcomer's decisive action became an example of how a community could uphold moral values in the face of reckless behavior. The biker, humbled and reflective, began to consider the implications of his actions beyond the immediate confrontation. He realized that strength is not measured by intimidation or the ability to cause harm, but by restraint, respect, and accountability. His reckless actions had been exposed not just to the veteran, but to the public, leaving a lasting lesson on the consequences of cowardice. This realization, though difficult, was the first step toward genuine understanding and growth. The veteran, meanwhile, continued his day-to-day life with quiet grace. His calm demeanor inspired others, showing that true courage does not demand recognition but naturally commands respect. He moved through the town, greeting neighbors and familiar faces, each interaction reinforcing the sense of community and moral clarity that had been so dramatically demonstrated earlier. His actions had left an imprint not only on the biker and the newcomer, but also on the entire neighborhood. The newcomer left the scene once it was clear that the biker had been subdued and the veteran was safe. His departure was quiet with no fanfare, but the impression he left was unforgettable. Witnesses remembered his decisive actions, his calm authority, and his willingness to act when needed. The combination of his courage and the veteran's steady presence became a tale that would be told and retold in the town, highlighting the impact of intervention guided by principle and courage. The days that followed saw the community discussing the events repeatedly. Parents used the story to teach children about courage and integrity. Friends discussed it in cafes and local gathering places. The moral of the story became clear to everyone. Cowardice and aggression are exposed quickly when faced with steady courage and decisive action. And true strength is shown not through violence but through restraint, patience, and ethical behavior. The biker, now more aware of the consequences of his actions, began to take steps toward understanding and accountability. He realized that change required more than apology. It required reflection, learning, and a commitment to act differently in the future. His companions, too, began to reconsider how they viewed strength and bravery, recognizing that moral courage is far more powerful than reckless aggression. For the veteran, the events became a quiet affirmation of his own life principles. Courage, dignity, and patience had allowed him to face a dangerous situation without fear. The respect he gained was not loud or celebrated, but it was deep and lasting, felt by all who had observed the confrontation. He had demonstrated that even in moments of threat, calm, ethical behavior shines brighter than aggression ever could.